Hi, this is Tom from Marcus Evans. Thank you all for attending today's webinar, Progressive Core Modernization, brought to you in partnership with Zafin. So before we begin, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping items. As you can see at the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so do feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We'll try to answer as many as possible during the webinar, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, we'll make sure to follow up with you in a separate email after the event. Also, a copy of today's slide deck and additional help materials are available in the resource list. We encourage you to download any resources or bookmark any links you may find useful. For the best viewing experience, we recommend using a wired internet connection and closing any programs or browser sessions running in the background. You can also find additional answers to some common technical issues located in the help widget at the bottom of your screen. And a reminder to look out for an email within 2 hours after the webinar is done with links to watch the recording on demand and view the webinar slides. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for the day, Bala from Zafin. Hope you all enjoy. Over to you, Bala.
Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you that are joining us for this webinar. My name is Bala. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Zafin. And I'm really pleased to welcome you all for the next hour to this really interesting discussion on progressive core modernization. Today, I'm joined in this panel discussion by two senior executives from IBM with whom I've had the pleasure of working with for the past many years, including the last 2 years, very closely. First and foremost is Chuck Calio. Chuck is from our IBM Z Business Development exec, and in particular, he works very closely with banking ISVs such as Zafin. And I'm also joined by Mitch Siegel. Mitch is a GBS leader for IBM's core banking transformation practice. So without further ado, let's get started on today's topic. Over the next hour or so, you'll hear from all of us. And there are some key themes that you'll be hearing and that evolves during this presentation. First and foremost is that core modernization has become a non-discretionary activity for banks. And there are some very interesting perspectives put forward by analysts such as Gartner and others, as well as consultants such as IBM, and you will hear from Mitch as well. What I show on this slide really is the perspective that this has not just become non-discretionary, but there's also a number of pathways to that modernization. Now, the reason that it's become non-discretionary from our experience is really because over the years, the changes that have gone into the core have really made it very, very additive in terms of functions and capabilities. And those additive changes have really reduced the business agility. And although a number of consulting firms as well as analysts have talked about it, over the years, last 2 years in particular, I have worked with a number of clients around the world who have actually taken action and achieved some very significant results in this space. But before we get started on the topic itself, I thought I'll have Chuck speak a little bit to what is the value that IBM Z has brought in over the many years as a platform for innovation. And then after Chuck, also have Mitch speak to some of the work that GBS has done in this space. So Chuck, would you like to share your thoughts on the IBM Z in this space?
Thank you, Bala. And first, on behalf of IBM, I'd like to thank you and the rest of the team at Zafin, Notion, David, John, Gabriel, and many others for inviting us to have this discussion with Zafin, and really excited about this partnership. So I joined IBM in 1980, walked in the door of the IBM mainframe lab, 705 building, 1980 as a college intern, and then a new hire in 1981. And so my first machine in the Z or mainframe environment was the 3084, which was IBM's first four-way, very innovative at the time in terms of symmetric multiprocessor, the most powerful machine IBM made back then. If we fast forward to fourth quarter 1999, right before Y2K, we released Linux on the mainframe, another step forward in innovation, very, very popular, quickly adopted by many of our customers. Then, of course, later on downstream, Red Hat OpenShift on the mainframe. This year, technologies like our Linux One Express systems, our Express pricing, some of our new tailored fit pricing, some of our HyperProtect technology, our IBM ZDIH for real-time surfacing of ZOS-based core data to real-time use cases and those kinds of things, really augment what we've always been known for, which is the strengths of the mainframe: reliability, availability, security, and performance. And I would say, that's been validated across the industry, especially with banking clients. It's interesting. If you're in the hardware business, it's oftentimes hard to have industry-specific solutions. But one thing I've always been fascinated with the Z brand is that we've always had really high adoption in banking, and that continues going forward, and there's reasons for that. And like we talked about, reliability, availability, security, the augmentation of Linux, cloud, OpenShift, and those kinds of things really propel that forward. And that's where we leverage, Zafin can inherit the qualities of those services and application, and then leverage other of our innovative technologies like IBM ZDIH. Now, key to this is really, to manifest the value to our customers, and that's what this webinar is really all about, is the value to customers, is some of the work that's done by Mitch and his team at GBS around integration, best practices, and accelerators. So let me turn it to Mitch, and he can give a little bit of an opening comment as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Don't quite have the tenure that Chuck does, but have about 25 years of advisory experience in this space. And, look, let's face it, we've been talking about core modernization for a long, long time, the better part of a couple of decades. And it really was something that was almost impossible to do for a good chunk of that time. I think what we've seen is patterns over the past, few years, and really accelerating those patterns around kind of progressive modernization. And really now, and Bala sort of alluded to this, that everything over the years has been baked into core systems of record. And, whether that be different regulatory processes or pricing or product catalogs or whatever that is, it's become incredibly complex to kind of extract the data that's needed from those systems and sort of hydrate APIs to create great experiences. And, that's really where we are now, is the need to be able to do that. And we've seen some patterns emerge over the past few years on the progressive side of modernization and things like externalization, which we'll talk about more today, that have really created this pivot point where core modernization doesn't have to be, this 7+ year journey anymore. We're seeing benefits that are actually accruing pretty quickly, and we'll talk about that. But we're in the business of helping our clients really get to value pretty quickly through their core modernization journeys. That's kind of the overriding goal of these efforts now.
Thank you, Mitch. And as we start thinking about what in particular is happening in this space around progressive modernization that Mitch alluded to, I thought let's just get ourselves going by thinking about each of us in our current context. And so I thought I'll have just a short poll around where do you think you are in terms of your modernization journey. So I'll give about a few seconds for you to think about this and respond. So while the responses start to come in, Mitch, I thought what I'll start moving into is the next phase of our discussion, which is really surrounding the type of modernizations that are there, the journeys that are there, and therefore the externalization as a possible way of getting to that end goal of a full modernization. So let me do this. Let me share some of the early results that we are seeing coming in. So clearly there are a number of different thought processes happening here in terms of what our customers are saying. There are some that are in process of doing it, and others that are assessing over the next few months, and some potentially a little further out. But irrespective, we know and we've seen that there are a number of different pathways to this modernization, but the successful ones that we've seen and that Mitch alluded to do seem to begin with this externalization. Let me just add that it's this externalization that brings about some incredibly unique things to your business. I worked with a bank last year that wanted, for example, to give $10 into your checking or savings account every time your favorite team in soccer scores a goal. And interestingly, you're starting to see the combination of financial and non-financial products for the first time. And it's these type of things that you can enable through this externalization. So Mitch, would love to hear your thoughts on some of these modernization journeys beginning with externalization.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Look, and I think what's interesting is we've all been talking about a lot of these themes for many years, but I think the technology and sort of the capabilities have really caught up to to the talk track, and we're kind of at this pivot point where we're starting to see a lot of successful efforts. And the patterns that we're seeing is externalization is pretty basic when you think about it, because what it's starting to do is extracting all those things that I previously mentioned that have been kind of hard-coded into core systems for really the past couple of 2 or 3 decades, and pulling them kind of up in the stack more closer to those experiences that are really trying to be personalized or hyper-personalized in some cases to compete with a lot of the new upstarts and fintechs that just aren't encumbered by that legacy tech stack. And what we've seen is, while the journey to replace a lot of those underlying core systems is still a multi-year journey, the benefit stream that you get from externalization actually starts really quickly as you start to hydrate APIs and experiences, and can really start to roll out new products and services associated with getting at the data in a much more real-time fashion or near real-time fashion, so that you can roll out products and services that are capable of personalization. Things like real-time balances and the ability to look at potential overdraft scenarios, to identify them before they occur and alert the customer. Things like the ability to do true relationship pricing, true 360-degree view of the customer. We've talked about that for over a decade, but externalization of those capabilities is really what's driving some of that success right now.
Thanks. And as we look into that externalization path and look at it from a technical standpoint, you realize that information and its flow are getting externalized, and therefore also need that reintegration back into the systems of record. And Chuck, would love your thoughts on what the IBM Z brings in particular to that information and its flow.
Thank you, Bala. So as basically supply and demand fluctuate quite a bit, real-time information, in particular real-time pricing and real-time product catalogs and such, the things that Zafin does, becomes much more important. In addition to hyper-personalization, really it's the real-time pricing, I think, that's in particular interest here. So we have a technology on the IBM Z side called IBM Z Digital Integration Hub, which really allows you to leverage information from a core system, a ZOS-based core system, and really present that to cloud-based applications, Zafin in particular, anywhere to enable these next generation of real-time or near real-time use cases that are really going to be key, I think, in this environment that we're currently in and will be in for the foreseeable future, where both supply and demand rapidly fluctuate, and the end game here is to really have the hyper-personalization and really to present that in a meaningful way to individuals, such that the banks themselves can increase their revenue and decrease their costs and expand their footprint against their competitors. Now, I think the other important thing to mention is that not everything has to be real time. But if you're in the domain of real time or near real time on Z, we have Z Digital Integration Hub, which is an absolute gem of a solution for these use cases in combination with Zafin.
Thanks, Chuck. And we'll be exploring some of these when we get into the more technical aspects of the discussion today. But as I said at the outset, our customers are doing this today. And you saw in some of the poll results that our customers already in their modernization journey. And what we have seen is that from many of these customers that have gone through these experiences of externalization, that beginning with externalizing product and pricing really pays off. And if you look at the charts on the left of the screen, you'll see that there have been problems when with some of the journeys where there were no externalization done, just given the risk and the time frames, et cetera. And the real value that externalization, in particular of product and pricing, that brings to you is it de-risks your program. And in de-risking it, it actually also enables time to benefit to be quicker. On this slide, as we went through this program working with our partner, IBM, we realized there were some incredible advantages of working with a partner like IBM. And very early on, I actually had two quotes on this slide, both from our panelists here. So let me just turn it over to you first, Mitch, to talk a little bit about what you say in your quote surrounding dynamic pricing.
Yeah, look, I think at the very essence, where many of these programs have failed in the past, and that's kind of the top swim lane, right, is that there's just a really ridiculously long lead time until you get any benefits. And, in the life cycle of executives, sometimes there's no benefits in that executive's tenure and role, which makes it really difficult to kind of fund and support some of these when you don't see the benefits and gain the inertia of those benefits within the organization. And so where we're seeing the patterns emerge, and dynamic pricing is a great example of it, is that actually there's quite a bit that you can do very early in the journey, as kind of indicated in the bottom swim lane, so that the focus is on gaining some of those benefits very early in the journey. And you can start to sort of manufacture the ability to create new revenue streams through, the ability to price better, the ability to think about unique features and services around products that are enabled way before you've ever thought about your implementation for the new core. And that's kind of the bottom swim lane. Pricing is one of the best examples that we've seen that can actually be implemented very early through, kind of the untrapping of data from your key systems of record, which can be, again, done very early in the process. And we've seen some payback periods, at least of those components, where, there's maybe 6 months, 9-month payback periods of those very early components. And what we've seen is when programs see benefits very early, you really get the entire organization start to really buy in, and the whole process gains inertia and starts moving faster and faster. And so we'll talk about, we use the word de-risk a lot. Just by gaining benefits earlier in the roadmap, you're essentially de-risking the entire program, because those benefits start to pay for the early cost of the program. And you start to get some of the customer stickiness and the other things based off of the value that you're driving through things like dynamic pricing and the ability to see data that's a little bit more dynamic than you've been able to do in the past.
Thanks, Mitch. And that early cost in that program can also be dealt with in a really creative way. And would love to hear Chuck talk about some of the uniqueness that IBM Z brings into that.
Thank you, Bala. So I think, if you're running IBM Z today with Linux, like IFLs or Linux One systems, and you may even have some spare capacity in place to start to do some testing of Zafin or to look at Zafin, because Zafin now runs directly on IBM Linux One. Also, if you go and look at some of the pricing announcements we did in May of this year, just a couple months ago, we've been pretty public about some of our interesting pricing with the Linux One Express 3 systems, numbers that start at 135K and wander on up a little bit above 200K. So I think I just want to make a point right up front that the mainframe itself has now been, reinvented, or the innovation around technical aspects has also flowed into the pricing aspects. And in particular, some of the newer announcements that we did back in May may give you some really good low-cost infrastructure options to get started. Now, the other thing we're known for with Linux One is consolidation capability or consolidation ratios. And some of the numbers I've been looking at imply anywhere between 5 to 10 x86 cores can be consolidated onto one Linux One core. So again, that core consolidation ratio where you can just consolidate more and more workload onto less engines on the IBM Z is another, benefit in terms of TCO or low-cost infrastructure to get started for on-premise solutions for Zafin. And again, Zafin being a very high-impact use case with low risk to get started in your journey to modernization. Back to you, Bala.
Thanks, Chuck. And you heard both Mitch and Chuck speak to some of these benefits that you can reap by externalizing. The key aspect here is that you are creating that benefit stream to happen much, much more earlier. And at the outset, we talked about the two key benefits of doing this type of modernization. The first being that you've de-risked your core modernization program itself, and the second being that you have accelerated those returns on that core modernization. So at Zafin, we look at it in terms of have you improved revenue? And at the bottom on this slide, there are some fantastic examples that you will see where by just externalizing a single product, banks have realized, a single line of business, banks have realized tens of millions of dollars of revenue improvement to accrue in that calendar year. But you also get incredible efficiency gains from some of the business agility that we enable through this externalization. And last but not the least, in this era of continuous compliance, banks around the world are seeing risk mitigation as well as compliance enablement from the type of solutions that we bring to the marketplace. But as I said, these benefits broadly accrue in these three types of buckets, and would love to get Mitch to speak to some of the benefits that he's seen from his experience in the modernization space.
Yeah, thanks, Bala. Also, I was scanning over a couple of the questions in the chat room, and one of them was related to APIs in sort of how do they relate to externalization. And my view of that would be that APIs are certainly very important to this journey. To me, APIs are more about sort of building an ecosystem, right? So we throw around a lot of terms like platform business models and things like that. Obviously, Amazon being the best example of a platform business model. I do believe that financial services are heading in that direction where sort of openness, we talk about banking as a service and those types of things where a bank may be powering another provider's capability to offer products and services into their customer segment because they don't have a banking license. To me, that's where APIs come in, is really in that ecosystem thing. Where we talk about externalization, it is really extracting capabilities that have been baked into the systems of record, the core systems for many years, and kind of moving them up, if you think about it, a technical stack, moving them up into, to use kind of old terminology, more of a mid-tier layer, closer to the experience and really right in between the ability to orchestrate data and the analytics to help kind of fuel that data orchestration. That's really the externalization. And some of those benefits, I mean, they're all listed on the page here. There's kind of three big buckets, and let's face it, these are the three big things that any bank is really trying to accomplish. They're trying to certainly mitigate risk and comply with regulations. They're certainly trying to improve revenue and create better customer experiences and better customer stickiness, especially in light of what's going on with a lot of the upstarts and fintechs. And they're trying to be more efficient in the way that they deliver those services and the cost to income ratios and return on equity that they're measuring. And so we really see, we talk about core modernization, and sometimes when you use those words, people immediately think of only the DDA application. But really, core modernization to me touches any system of record and the ability to really kind of extract the movement kind of up and down that stack and make it easier to extract data and use data to kind of hydrate experiences, to hydrate APIs, to fuel this ecosystem, to fuel new customer experiences. That's really the externalization part of this that drives the benefit stream, and also accelerates the eventual migration potentially to new systems of record. I mean, we've seen a lot of those in the past that take maybe 7 to 10 years to get there. It's just way too long. We're talking in terms of a few years now, really, to replace those systems.
Thanks, Mitch. And we've taken the last maybe 25 minutes looking at the business benefits that accrue from this type of externalization. And let's start to slowly transition into some of the technical aspects. And in doing so, and before we get into the actual technical aspects itself, I thought we'd look at the architecture and how that evolves. Now, I show you a possible end state, having worked this with a number of banks. But on the left side, what I also show is a view. It's kind of like a CMM-like view that talks to how does this architecture evolve. So that evolution I've shown as in terms of having starting off from a very fragmented technical base and evolving to a highly optimized and integrated tech stack. And it's that evolution in a CMM-like manner that you are enabling to create this, to ensure that this modernization journey will succeed. The first step in that architecture evolution is this creation of a cross-product layer. And it's this cross-product layer that where the externalized product and pricing and related functions will manifest itself into. So, Mitch or Chuck, do you have a view on the evolution of this end state architecture from your experiences?
Yes, this is Chuck. I can just add a little bit to that. So really, if you look at from an IBM perspective in conjunction with Zafin, what are the 4 things that are new here? From an architectural standpoint, or from a platform availability matrix standpoint, or from a platform support matrix, the addition or the certification by Zafin of running their software on IBM Linux One, or on the IBM mainframe running Linux with Red Hat OpenShift, certainly brings new technology where you can co-locate Zafin as it's been externalized and really leverage the Zafin software and their deep expertise in pricing and product catalog, co-located right on your mainframe with ZOS applications right on the same mainframe. So that's sort of architectural component number 1. Architectural component number 2 is also very interesting, which is you can really run Zafin anywhere. Zafin on any cloud provider, Zafin on-prem. However, if you leverage Z Digital Integration Hub, you can now have real-time information presented and refreshed quickly to Zafin applications which are running on the cloud, a kind of a hybrid cloud where you leverage the data on ZOS-based cores, and then you leverage Zafin anywhere. The third option is that Zafin now can run on the IBM FS Cloud with our HyperProtect technology. And one of the incremental differentiators there is the entire compliance arena, which the IBM FS Cloud really specializes in. And I think most important, if you just look at this chart, you see a lot of moving pieces in terms of an architecture. And so the word you'll hear over and over again is in the center of the chart: integration, integration, integration layer. And there is the domain and expertise of Mitch, and I'll turn it over to Mitch to give a little bit of color around the integration that GBS and his practice brings to this.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And I think it's interesting. This is a pretty good view of kind of a high-level architectural tech stack. We often debate these. There's probably 4 or 5 different versions that I've seen, and I like all of them. But overall, I think, and one of the visuals that I've seen a lot that kind of oversimplifies this, much simpler than this, is where you look at kind of the old architectural tech stack as a pyramid, right? Where all of the investment dollars and the time and the energy have really gone kind of at the bottom of this picture into the systems of record, right? And we've been talking about that. That's where all of the capabilities have really been hard-coded over the past couple of 2 or 3 decades. And what we're seeing in the past few years and really accelerating now is almost the flipping of that to an upside-down pyramid, where you really start to see more of the effort being focused in kind of the top to middle layers of the architecture, where again, the externalization is essentially extracting or pulling some of those capabilities really through this integration layer, leveraging the process layer, and really trying to kind of hydrate that customer experience layer through things like by applying AI and ML. And integration's a good word, I think, in a lot of different ways, maybe sometimes overused a bit, because some of the patterns now actually are easing the integration, right? We used to talk about integration in the context of point-to-point interfaces, and we're not really talking about point-to-point interfaces anymore. We're really talking about integrating data into experiences and APIs and things like that, and the integration is much simpler than we used to talk about it. This is more about how do we leverage analytics to get smarter and to really bring more intuitive features and functions to our clients kind of through that customer experience layer by kind of that light integration and externalizing things like pricing and billing and product master and employee experience and enablement tools, extracting from the bottom of this view kind of closer to the actual experience layer. So we're starting to see, the very easy visual for me is the pyramid kind of flipping upside down in the way we're approaching these.
Thanks, Mitch. And that's a really interesting perspective. I have, as I said, I have worked with Mitch and his team on a number of these architectural patterns that exist, including the integration. As I looked at one of the questions that just came in, the interesting aspect of this architecture is that it's just as applicable to the larger ones, as larger banks, as it is to community banks and credit unions. In fact, we are in active discussions as we speak with a number of community banks and credit unions around exactly this type of architecture and evolution that allows for externalization while reintegrating back into the systems of record that exist across a number of different platforms. So the key here is, as you evolve this end state architecture, and both Mitch and Chuck touched upon this, you got to ensure that as you create that cross-product layer, you're also now enabling this highly simplified integrations to happen. And these highly simplified integrations in the past were very, very batch-driven because the core systems were more batch-enabled rather than anything else. But over the last 3, 4, 5 years, these batch-driven systems have become much more real-time, just given some of what Mitch talked about in terms of analytic enablement and so forth. So as they become real-time and near real-time driven, you will start to see that the batch-driven integrations start to becoming more and more like API-driven as well as event-driven. And therefore, data streaming and those type of concepts become very key here. So I know one of the questions was purely around API that you touched upon, Mitch, earlier. Maybe perhaps talk a little bit about what you're seeing as well in our joint work into these event-driven type streaming architectures.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And actually, I'd probably add one more kind of piece to my statements earlier on APIs, because really there's kind of the outer APIs, which are more the ecosystem play, and then there's the inner APIs, which are really helping move data around the bank itself, the bank's estate. So APIs kind of are, the inner APIs are kind of part of that, certainly that externalization journey. But this is a really, really simplified view and great view in some ways, because what it's showing is, the batch world used to just go out to the data warehouse, and that kind of goes back to that point-to-point type of environment that I was referring to earlier, where everything's complex because it has to be built point-to-point. And now we're putting the emphasis kind of higher in that tech stack that we looked at earlier. And everything's about events now. Everything can turn into an event. Those events are real time or very near real time, and they're leveraging a greater myriad of places to go fetch data from that's in more real time, apply business intelligence. We've got fraud over on the right-hand side. Obviously, as things get more real time, like real-time payments, which we're all moving towards, you also need to be able to combat fraud in a more real-time capability. So it's really thinking through, how do you build all of those real-time events and kind of moving up that stack and getting access to that data so that it's not trapped into those systems of record, so that you can use events to move faster and kind of hydrate all of those great experiences and great externalized capabilities that we've talked about through those inner APIs and eventually outer APIs into the ecosystem. This is really where we see the industry going right now, and how kind of our legacy clients are really going to be able to compete with the much more nimbler, kind of neobanks that have really inundated the market over the past few years.
Thanks, Mitch. And as we get into that type of evolution happening in terms of integrations as well, I've worked with Mitch's team on the event-driven aspect, where Zafin as a platform can participate in both publishing as well as in subscribing to events, so that we can both be reactive to events as they happen in real time or near real time, and also be able to publish back the results so it can be consumed by systems, including core systems. Now, these core systems for many of the banks that we work with are on IBM Z, and therefore it behooved us to as you externalize product pricing and those related capabilities, you have to reintegrate them back with the systems of record. And so we looked into some really enhanced integration options, as I said earlier. And as Chuck alluded to this, in particular, we worked with IBM Z last year to enable that reintegration to happen through the Z Digital Integration Hub. It's a fascinating technology. I spoke with the CTO for IBM Z last year at an in-memory computing summit on the work that we did. And it's a fascinating piece of work. So would love to have, Chuck, your views on Z Digital Integration Hub and in particular some of the in-memory aspects that enable API event-driven to happen at incredible speeds.
Well, I think, if you look at the system of record, we have, many different data sources which are incredibly important. DB2 for ZOS, vSAM, IMS data, those kinds of things. And really, Z Digital Integration Hub is optimized to present the information gleaned from that in real time to applications like Zafin And again, the other beauty of this technology is that Zafin can be running anywhere, or some of the services from Zafin can be running on one platform and others can be running on another platform. And then you can leverage that top layer of ZDIH to really present to applications like Zafin, a summary of the information in real time gleaned from multiple sources spanning, for example, DB2 4 ZOS, KICS, VSAM data, and or IMS, which really represents a bulk of what I would say, or what I would sort of look at the system of record data. And then, of course, they integrate that with other sources of data to give this 360 view of the client. And what could be a more important use case than pricing? When I think about pricing, it is in my mind, it is the use case that for hundreds of years, not just recently, has benefited from being able to access the most current information spanning multiple sources. It's interesting. I'm reading a book right now about the U.S. Post Office, and one of the early beneficiaries of the U.S. Post Office was the stock market people. And again, this, as much information as possible, delivered as quickly as possible, has always been something that has benefited pricing. We talked about pricing being the wheelhouse of Zafin and how it's a good first step in your modernization journey. And again, if you want to leverage the information gleaned from the ZOS-based core, and your choices are to run Zafin anywhere, you have the ability to do that now with IBM Z Digital Integration Hub. As a customer, we will offer you a no-charge workshop just to get acquainted with, discussions around what is it, a little bit more information, and use cases potentially identified from that going forward. So let me turn it back to you, Bala.
Thanks, Chuck. And as you contemplate through some of these enhanced options that you have for integration with the IBM Z, I thought I'll just do another quick poll around some of the application development time that you're currently experiencing on your Z. And there's a reason for this, because as we think through your options that you have before you, there are some fantastic capabilities that are coming out from our IBM Z. So let me give you a few, about 30 seconds for you to think through and respond to this.
Yeah, I think, Bala, interesting what Chuck was just alluding to as far as, speed of transaction. And obviously in the wealth management trading business, that's really, really important, right? And we've seen just as a society, really quite a bit of change in the way we kind of all interact with our portfolios, right? And you look at some of what happened with GameStop, and it used to be that your wealth advisor came into your kitchen maybe twice a year to rebalance your portfolio, and that was the only time you looked at it. And now people have this supercomputer in their hand; they're making trades all day long, and the load that creates on the back end systems is really just unbelievable. They weren't built for that, and so speed of transaction becomes really, really important the way we're interacting now with our finances. Exactly,
and also the agility that requires you to do becomes really critical. So if I take a quick look at some of the responses we've gathered thus far, there's a preponderance of folks that are looking at 3 to 9 months in terms of new application development. This is on your existing IBM Z. And a lot of this is really possible because of some of the significant enhancements that IBM has brought in terms of platform strengths. So Chuck, would you mind taking the team through some of what you see are the key advantages that IBM Z brings in?
Thank you, Bala. So one thing that's interesting is that, in a financial services environment or in a banking environment, you really have to have infrastructure that almost has two personalities to it, or two qualities of service to it. Sort of, on one hand, you have to support the interactive mode, and on the other hand, the same machinery has to support the batch mode. And oftentimes, the CPU, I/O, and memory characteristics of both of those are dramatically different. And this is something that I've noticed over time is really a strength of the IBM Z system for real-world production environments, especially in the environment we live in, where variability can vary quite a bit day by day. But in general, we're known for, of course, our reliability, availability, and security, and the innovation associated with that. Some of the interesting things that apply to the industry-specific use case of this hardware, IBM Z, in the banking environment is the broad fluctuations on a daily basis that banks can encounter for their IT systems, including this week as an example of just some stock market volumes, for example. So our ability to scale capacity for growth, like I said, if I go back to 1980, my first project in IBM in the mainframe division, actually as a new hire out of college, really I worked on the most powerful mainframe back then, the 3084, and I continue to work on IBM's most powerful mainframes going forward. So we do understand the performance our customers want for the banking environment and this sort of multiple personality of having to support interactive workloads and use cases, and at the same time, within a 12-hour interval, switch over to batch, which is a completely different profile for CPU, memory, and I/O utilizations. Like I've said before, it's often taken for granted, but you don't want the hardware to be in the way of running the software. We are known really across the industry for unprecedented high availability and minimum recovery times. Take a look at some of our newer consumption models, especially some of the stuff announced back in May around some of the newer on-prem Linux Express system pricing, some of our IFL pricing, some of our cloud-based type pricing going forward. We have a lot of newer consumption models that make the economics attractive to get started in, and we've always had attractive economics around adding incremental capacity to an existing mainframe environment. And of course, security, this is really where we're all really well known for them at IBM, and this is really probably, I would say, number one, top of the mind concern with our customers, both on-prem and as they look at cloud. Everything spanning from our encryption technology to our HyperProtect newer technology, which is part of the FS Cloud offering that was just announced with Zafin. So again, in this type of situation, the platform strengths of the IBM Z get inherited by Zafin software when you run Zafin software on IBM Z. However, I would like to just double back and talk about that other use case scenario, which is to leverage IBM Z Digital Integration Hub to really surface that traditional mainframe system of record data spanning DB2 for ZOS, CICS IMS, and those kinds of things to Zafin, anywhere you choose to run Zafin. So again, back to you, Bala.
Thanks, Chuck. And the key point that Chuck made is that this is about the information flow because the data continues to reside on IBM Z in these cases where you can choose to house it on the IBM Z. And as you start creating that cross-product layer, leveraging the simplified integrations that exist, including the Z Digital Integration Hub and so forth, as you start doing that and evolving more and more of your application to real-time, near real-time type opportunities, you'll realize that data and analytics are becoming key, and they're going to become central to all the propositions that you build, including product and pricing in the future. What I show here are some of the work that at Zafin that we are currently doing with some of the global banks as well as other banks. This is including things like wellness insights, not just from a retail standpoint, but also from a corporate bank standpoint. And we help banks through that simplified integration layer with analytics that they can take advantage of and create some very actionable insights that we produce. And this is where our industry is heading. And you've heard this mentioned by both Chuck as well as Mitch. So I'd like to have Mitch speak a little bit around some of the analytic work that I know his team is also engaged in.
Yeah, thanks, Bala. I mean, look, I think it's actually all kind of here, right? So as we talk about the ability to untrap data, which we've talked about a lot today, then you have access to that data, and the question is, what do you do with it, right? And where we're seeing some really kind of unique and interesting things, and you've got sort of a layer of them here, is the ability to do all kinds of personalization in different offers, personalization in the way you service, the ability to provide self-serve dashboards that have a lot of NLP and AI capabilities built in that can kind of, automate a lot of the capabilities that some clients are doing. And, where we see a lot of our clients looking is, okay, what are the types of things that we want our customers to be able to come in and self-service versus where do people actually want to understand that there is a human being behind the scenes somewhere, and there might be some level of interaction required, a large transaction, such as a mortgage. In the past, historically, we've seen while the end customer wants that to be a very intuitive and slick process, they in some cases don't want that to be 100% self-automated because it's a big transaction. They want to understand that there's a financial institution and human beings behind there. But it's really in the way that you kind of look across being very journey focused, right? What are the customers of your journeys? And we tend to focus those things on life events, right? So I need my dream home. I got to send my kids to college. I'm planning for retirement, those types of things. And then look across those journeys and think about where automation and high levels of personalization through the ability to apply analytics to that data, and how do you sort of hydrate or populate those journeys with the right personalized offer or service experience at the right time to really drive that customer stickiness.
Thanks, Mitch. And I know as you think through both how your architecture will evolve and what type of business value you want to bring to your customers, I'd like to just close this out by sharing both the emails of all of us that have spoken here today, as well as some possible next steps as you contemplate what you'd like to do in terms of modernizing your core systems and or leveraging the consulting capabilities that IBM might bring into this, either through a diagnostic to assist you with your journey or some additional thought processes to enhance that. But also, we are also at Zafin available to do a rapid proof of concept to demonstrate this product and pricing externalization for you. Let me quickly turn to some of the questions that have come up during this. In particular,
Bala, I was just scanning the questions. There were a couple in here that I think were very related to some of what we were just discussing. One was, do we see examples where our clients are not thinking about externalization? And, I'd say, yeah, there's every flavor out there. What we're talking about here is where we've seen the greatest success patterns, and our externalization is a part of every one of those where we've seen great success patterns. And then I think there was a question very related about community banks are usually procuring their, many of their systems of record, sometimes in a SaaS model through the Fiservs and FISs of the world. And is there the ability to take kind of the same, externalization approach? And I would say, yeah, there is. In fact, to your point earlier, Bala, I worked on a very similar type of core modernization for a really small bank, a $1.5 billion bank recently, and the patterns are all the same. They were procuring a lot of their core systems in a SaaS model from those particular vendors, but still being able to extract some of that capability and externalize that more in their middle tier layer to get that same flexibility, that same personalization that we have referred to. And then there's probably a couple in here, Bala, that you could address directly as well.
Absolutely. And I agree with that, Mitch. In fact, besides doing proof of concept with community banks and credit unions, we've also done some very interesting work, and as a consequence of that, created a very tailored, specific offering for community banks that we call Community Advantage, and happy to take any of you that would love to hear more about that, and we'll be happy to share more details surrounding that. I did see a question in terms of addressing the load generated by aggregators on the back-end systems of banks. And in fact, a lot of the aggregators, their role really is to aggregate product type information that may exist at other institutions and so forth. And that's when you externalize your product systems, both within your firm as well as outside, you have the capability to doing some really interesting things, which is what we do. So the aggregation that may happen both within and outside are things that we handle at Zafin, and so can really take a lot of those capabilities that you don't need within your core systems can be externalized as well. So when you externalize the product that potentially may have been aggregated by somebody else, you can create that arrangement master, which we've done for one of the banks, that actually decreases the load that you put on the back end. So there are a lot of interesting options that we enable architecturally.
Yeah, Bala, the other thing that I saw in the questions as we kind of close out here, I think the one we didn't answer is somebody asked, it's a great question, are these patterns available if they are not currently consumers of IBM Z? And the short answer is yes. You might not make Chuck happy, but these patterns, we see in every type of modernization that we're involved with right now. Obviously, a lot of them involve Z, some do not, and yes, the patterns are very similar.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. In fact, Chuck also alluded to that when he talked about Zafin Anywhere, and you can have the externalization be anywhere, as well as your core systems be anywhere. As we integrate multiple core systems, I remember we worked with one client that had 9+ core systems that they would consider core, and not all are on Z, but some are on other platforms as well. So yes, as Mitch said, the pattern of integration and the pattern of externalization applies to any type of platforms that you might be running. So I think we have at this point addressed most of the questions here, and if there are others that come in, we'll take it offline and we'll make that available to everyone that have participated in this. So let me turn it over back to Tom, if that's okay with both of you, Mitch and Chuck.
Yes, please do. And again, thank you to our clients and Bala and his team at Zafin for hosting us.
Thank you. Tom?
Brilliant. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Bala, Chuck, and thank you, Mitch. And thank you for sharing these great insights and being so generous with your time today. And a reminder to everyone out there to look out for an email within the next 2 hours with links to download today's material. And we'd also really like your feedback. So if you could take a minute to answer our very brief survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of the session, we'd really appreciate it. On behalf of Zafin and Mark 7's webinars, we'd just like to thank you all for joining us and do hope you'll be listening in at our next event. Take care and have a good rest of your day.